Hey everyone, it's Andrew from GembaRed, and today we have a special review for you between these two body lights. It's the SGrow VIG1000 and the Joovv Solo. So why are we comparing these two lights? Because the SGrow brand is becoming very popular with Reddit, with forums, with Facebook. They've got representatives kind of spamming a lot of these groups, and so the question is always asked, is it legit? Is it real? How does it compare to the big boys? And so the only way we can put this to bed is to compare the VIG1000 to the Joovv Solo. And that's the key thing. This is, I got this for $300. And this one, the Joovv Solo, retails at $1,195 last I checked. So we're talking about a fourth the price. You could get 4 of these VIG1000s for the price of one Joovv Solo. Or you could get one GembaRed Groove, my product, for the same, pretty much the same price, around 300 bucks for one of these, which is about 3 times the size as the GembaRed Groove. So it's always, begs the question. A lot of people ask, like, if something's too cheap, like, is it good quality? Is it a scam? And that's what we need to figure out. Is it going to compare well to the Joovv Solo? So it's good to have these side-by-side comparisons and see how things go. In any other industry, you would be able to look up the spec sheets on 2 different products and say, okay, what's the watts? What's the watts? What's the intensity? Intensity. EMFs. Flicker. Go down the list, compare the 2 just on paper. You should be able to trust that those numbers are accurate, that they're truthful, And right now in the red light therapy industry, we don't trust that. We don't trust any of it. So, if you're going to be shopping for a computer and you're looking at a name brand and you want to compare it to, some off-brand, you have the truth in advertising that I can look up both of these brands, both of these computers. I can look up the gigahertz. I can look up the storage space, the hard drive, how many gigabytes does it have. I can look up the RAM. You can look up, whatever's important to you, whatever's your deciding factors, you should be able to compare a name brand computer to an off-brand computer. You should be able to compare, high-end cars to low-end cars, high-end red light therapy panels to low-end red light therapy panels. You should have that. That is protected to you by the FTC. Truth in advertising. These are basics that we haven't gotten to in the red light therapy industry. So the only way we can determine is just to do some side-by-side measurements with, tools that I've had. I've accumulated a lot of tools. We're going to do the watts. We're going to check the intensity with a couple different meters. We're going to check the EMFs, both electric and magnetic. We're going to check flicker and maybe decibels, the noise, because both of these have built-in fans. So you don't want it too noisy. It's just loud, it's disruptive. I don't like noise. I try to make panels that don't have fans. So as we go along, obviously, I'm the owner of GembaRed. I sell my own panels. I'm going to be biased against both of these. So again, you can take the measurements, do what you want with them. Take my commentary. Those are my opinions. Those are my assessments based on my experience. So, whatever I say about the measurements as we go along, those are my opinions. And again, you can make your own choice. Look at the measurements. Look at what we're telling you. And, the first thing to start out with is optically, by eye, we can see they're very similar panels, right? They're about 3 feet tall, 10 inches wide, so they're similar size. It's best to compare similar size panels. There's a lot of different panels on the market, and when we want to compare them, you want to be kind of equivalent. So similar size panels. Both have 2 wavelengths, 660 nanometer red, and 850 nanometer infrared, invisible. So, you're going to see half the bulbs look like they're not doing anything. Those are the invisible bulbs. The other half, 660 nanometer. Both of them have it pretty much the same, half and half red, half near infrared. You can control both of them independently. So if you only want red for a certain treatment, only want near infrared for a certain treatment, those are options that are built in. So if you want those options, both of them have it. And then obviously the way you use it. You might hang it on the wall. You might hang it on a door, you might just kind of stand it up on a little table like I have. And then what do? You stand in front of it for 10 to 20 minutes. You stand maybe 6 to 12 inches away, whatever your protocol is, whatever the manufacturer recommends, and you do that kind of daily. So, theoretically, you got the same wavelengths, you use them similarly, the intensities are going to be, a certain range, but, still probably a therapeutic range, even without me measuring it yet. So you're going to use them the same. Theoretically, you could get the same benefit, even from $300 versus almost $1,200, right? So theoretically, you get the same benefits, but what's the quality? What's the differences in EMF or flicker? What's the real, power levels and intensity? That's what we want to figure out. So if you want to spend that extra money, you have the knowledge to say, yeah, I spent my money and I knew what I was buying and I got what I wanted. Or, oh, you know what, I saved a couple bucks for something that I think is equivalent, but, that's the benefit of the sale. If you get something that's cheaper but claims to be better than the competition, but they lied about their claims, then you don't really benefit, right? Because you were scammed. So that's what you need to look out for. That's why we're going to compare two side by side so you can see the differences. So with all that, we're going to get started. We're going to start with watts, the consumed watts, not the rated watts. Rated watts for this one is 1,000. This one says it's 1,000. This one says it's 300. So the SGrow VIG1000, why do they say 1,000? That's a lot. They have 200 bulbs, 200 LEDs, and they're 5-watt rated bulbs. That's what they claim. So 200 5-watt bulbs, you get 1,000 watts. That's the rated watts. These have 150 bulbs, and Joovv says on their website they're 2-watt rated bulbs. So that's where you get 300. So right off the bat, we see something kind of fishy. This says 1,000, this says 300. So either there's a big difference between the two, or there's something funky going on. So let's go into the watts watts measurement. We use a kilowatts meter. You'll see that, and we'll get started. Okay, so we have the VIG1000 plugged into our kilowatt meter. Right now it's not on, so it's not drawing any watts. And we'll go ahead and turn on the VIG1000. So we're going to do both wavelengths, red, near infrared. Both come on. You hear the fans coming on. And let's give it a minute just to make sure the number kind of settles in. So it's holding right at 307 watts. And remember we said this is 1,000-watt rated units, but it's really only doing 306 watts. So that's why you gotta ask for the actual consumed watts when you're buying a unit and not just go by the rated watts. Alright, 305, so let's stick with that number 305. We're going to turn it off, we're going to unplug this. Plug in the Joovv Solo. Joovv Solo is plugged in. I'm going to actually flip the switch on the back. It's over here. Right there. So that comes on, but you see it's not on yet because you got to go by, you got to control, turn it on from the controller here. So it's not on yet, it's kind of like an idle mode, but you can see it's already drawing almost a watt of power, 0.9 watt. So whenever you have your Joovv in, if you're just turning it on and off with the idle mode, you're actually wasting a little bit of electricity all day long if you leave it plugged in. So you should probably turn it off from the kill switch in the back, to save a little bit of electricity. So anyway, let's turn it on. So we got both modes on, red and near infrared, turns on. Nice little pattern. Okay, looking at the kilowatt. $247. So we got 247, and the Joovv says it's rated for 300. So that's a lot more in line with what was advertised as the rated wattage, and they're actually pulling 247, 246. But obviously it's still under the 305 that we just saw coming from the VIG1000. So if we go by just the consumed watts, the VIG1000 is still consuming more. It was kind of a trick in terms of calling it 1,000 when it's only 305, but still consuming more than the Joovv. Okay? Okay, so we just did the actual consumed watts measurement for the SGrow VIG1000 compared to the Joovv Solo. VIG1000 was at about 305 watts. Joovv Solo was at 246, right? So that's about 60 watt, 59 watts difference between these two panels, with the VIG pulling more power. And so theoretically you might say, if you're comparing two similar sized units, that maybe the VIG1000 would have the edge in terms of actual optical output. Remember, we just measured the consumed power. Consumed power has to still go through the power drivers inside of here. It has to go through, it has to power the fans, so some of the power goes to the fans. And we don't know how efficient the LED bulbs are going to be. You know, you could be using some cheap LEDs versus higher-end LEDs, so the actual kind of conversion from electrical energy to optical energy, what do you actually get? So it could be, you know, one panel's really inefficient and drawing more power, so, you know, the watts consumption is kind of a good comparator, but you don't want to go by that and say it's definitely going to be more powerful. You also don't know, you know, the lens angles, beam angles, how the LEDs are clustered. You know, there's a lot of subtle differences. So that's why if you're comparing two things, the watts are similar. You know, there's a 60 watt difference, so theoretically this one could be outputting more, but you don't know the efficiency. So again, a lot of people use the watts as a good kind of comparator, especially when you can't trust the intensity measurements. And I think that's what's happened in a lot of forums. They said just go by the watts because you can't trust the intensity. Everyone's just blindly saying greater than 100 milliwatts or greater than 110 milliwatts or whatever they're saying nowadays. It doesn't make sense. Why do you even have like a clean 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared? What's the distance? How are you measuring it? And so we're going to measure both of these with 3 different units. We're going to do 2 solar power meters. We're going to do 2 of the most popular solar power meters. And I've done blogs about this. I've done other reviews about these. Both of these read falsely high, especially with longer wavelengths like red, you know, deep red, and near infrared. Generally, we get twice as high, fake, twice as high, falsely high on these types of units. But these are what is almost like the industry standard for people selling panels. In the real industry, in the clinical studies, nobody uses solar power meters. You'd be laughed out of your profession. You wouldn't be a scientist anymore if you use these. There was a recent interview with Dr. Hamblin. He says solar power meters are not appropriate. You should use laser power meter, thermopile, spectroradiometer. You know, those are real things that are commonly used in the studies by professionals, not solar power meters. These are made to estimate sunlight, which is full spectrum. And so that's why it'll read falsely high. If you're only reading the higher end of the spectrum, there's a sensitivity curve for these little diodes. Anyway, so we're going to do these 2, and we've got my Sanwa solar laser power meter. Sanwa laser power meter, I've tested it, compared it to my third-party lab, and I've measured my own lights, comparing it to, it's pretty accurate. It's really good, especially, you know, a lot of maybe some of these startups that are importing cheap lamps, they say, oh, you know, it's too expensive to get you third-party measurements. It's too, I don't know where to go. Where do you get third-party measurements? What do you do? I had third-party measurements from day one when I started my business. It's not that hard. Anyway, and then I bought this to help give more reviews, give people an option. If you can't afford this, this is $270. You know, it's not that much. So get the right equipment to measure your stuff. Have respect for your customers and have respect for yourself if you're running a professional business. Simple. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get started. Look at these two. Look at this. You know, these two will tell you why companies are false advertising their power outputs, and you'll understand it when you see these. And then this will tell you closer to reality, right? So let's get started. Okay, we're going to start with the Juve measurement. And you can see we're off, but we're starting with just 1 watt per meter squared. Maybe there's a little bit of stray light in here, but it's only adding 1 watt, so we can keep that in mind. But it's not too much. So, you know, if you were in a lab setting, like how my lab does, they have a specialized room that eliminates all the stray light, a perfectly dark room. So, anyway, we're going to do it anyway. You know, this is much brighter, so it's really, the stray light's not going to make a big difference. So we can see, once we turn on the Juve, this is 6 inches away, and we're up to 787, and that's watts per meter squared. So the conversion's pretty easy, so it's 78.7 milliwatts per centimeter squared, so 78. And so that's just from this solar power meter, like I said, the 10 Mars TM206. That reads falsely high. It's a really popular unit. Just going to grab the measurement so you can see, double check the ruler. Still at 6 inches. Alright. So, anyway, so we're at 786 on the solar power meter. Let's get the other solar power meter up here too. So this one's reading a little lower. Let's put it in the center here, make sure. The sensor here we want kind of centered. And then I'll double check the measurement. Let's move it up a little bit. Okay, so we're 6 inches away, and we're at 672. And that's again on a solar power meter, but again it's pretty different than the 10 Mars one. So you can see there's already a discrepancy between the 10 Mars solar power meter and this TES 13333. I probably said that too many times, but you can already see there's a discrepancy. You know, and so you know, who are you going to trust? What are you going to do? And now we're going to look at a solar power meter. This one's a little bit tricky to hold. And this one reads in milliwatts, so we have to convert later. So let's say we're reading at 28 milliwatts, or 29. So again, 29 milliwatts around the center. Right. So we have to do a quick conversion on that. Let me grab my phone. So what do? We do 29, and we're going to multiply by 0.8. That's the correction factor. That you get the correction factors on the back side here. So we got 28 times point, and then we're going to divide by the sensor area was 0.636. And so we get 36, that's milliwatts per centimeter squared. So you can see a massive difference. We're getting only 36 on the laser power meter, and the other two were up around mid 600s, 700. So it's a huge difference. So if you're getting only 36 based on a laser power meter, and you know, Juve does have some third-party measurements that shows that this is much more accurate, because their third-party measurements is somewhere around 33. So we go by this, right? Gamba Red goes by this. Everyone else goes by something like this. that's going to read double, right? So that's a problem for the entire industry. And, you know, none of these numbers are anywhere close to, you know, 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So where are people even getting that number? So anyway, it's a huge deal. So we're going to scoot over, take my whole setup here, and try to just scoot it over to the VIG1000. And then we're going to remeasure everything, get it lined up. Turn off this Joovv. Turn this on. Okay. 10 bars. Put that up first. Make sure everything's lined up. Yep, so we're just about, we got it right at 6 inches. So this one's reading, what is that? 121 milliwatts per centimeter squared, because we moved the decimal. So 121 milliwatts per centimeter squared on the solar power meter. So that is, you know, again, if you're just comparing this measurement versus the Joovv, it does tell us it's more powerful. So even if you're using a solar power meter as a comparative, then maybe, yeah, you could say the VIG1000 is telling us it's more powerful. But I don't trust these, because as the power keeps going up and up, these start to act really funny. So this one's saying 120. Let's see what the TES says. Make sure that's centered. Get my ruler. Push that. I'm going to push it. Okay, so 6 inches. We lined it up again. So this one's, again, it's only reading 101. So we went from 120 from one measurement to 101 in this TES 1333. So again, huge discrepancy between the other one and this one. But again, if you compare to Joovv, this one's definitely higher. So you can't argue that. But again, these numbers get really funky. So that's why I can't trust them. So where's my solar power meter, laser power meter? This guy, I have to hold it. So this one's giving me 30, almost 31 if you round. It's hard, let me get the ruler out again. Yeah, so it's pretty good, because when I hold it out here, it'll be lined up. So it's 30. So let's say it's 30. Alright, so we're going to look at the laser power meter that got 30, and remember Joovv got 29. So Joovv got 29, this one got 30. So, just right off the bat, they sound more similar. So actually I can go back to my calculation here, and I'm just going to change this number to 30, because the correction factors are all the same. Change this to 30, so that's 37 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So 30, we get 37. And remember, Joovv was only at 29, 36. So really, according to a laser power meter, we're only off by one. The Joovv Solo is only different by 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. And that kind of makes sense, because like I said, the SGrow was only, 60 watts more powerful, and it might be more inefficient. So, so 30. You get 37, almost 38. So, you're only off by 1 or 2 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So it's really not much. But if you want to believe, if you end up believing this, that just starts to go off the charts, if you trust all these solar power meters that go off the charts, it's it's almost like non-linear how they keep reading higher and higher. You can't trust it. So that's why we're so far off. All these measurements are so far off. And even Joovv's blog, if they revealed the actual intensities of all the units, you would see it's not like, oh, this one's twice as much as this one's twice as much as this one. All these units are actually a lot closer than you think, but they're just measuring it wrong. So that's why you need the right measurement tool. So these two are very similar in terms of power. So, right? So we could just kind of prove that. So they're actually very similar. So even though the VIG1000 says it's so much extra power, and Joovv says something, it doesn't matter. They're pretty similar in terms of intensity. Okay. So that last section was really revealing to me, even to me, because I had just taken these measurements for the first time too, that these solar power meters not only read falsely high, but when you're trying to compare two lights with one light that maybe is a little bit higher, this one goes out of control. And so it's almost like a non-linear response. As you get higher and higher intensity, this one starts to shoot up a lot faster than, say, a laser power meter, which is probably more stable, more calibrated, better overall. So that's the sand one. So that's, part of the discrepancy that we keep seeing is that, all these companies, even early on, they started coming out saying, oh, we're twice as powerful as the Joovv, and they're showing a solar power meter measurement. But it's like almost non-linear. It's like even a small, couple milliwatts per centimeter squared difference, these things shoot up. So it's kind of like a really funky kind of phenomenon, and that's why you can't really trust these. And you can't trust it even for a comparative analysis. You're like, what's really going on? And it's almost unfair to Joovv when all these companies are saying, oh, we're twice as powerful as Joovv. They use a solar power meter, and it goes haywire, and it works in benefit of the competitor, but it's really not fair to Joovv, because everyone should be measuring with something more accurate, more stable, that doesn't fly off the rails. So it's unfair, as we go along, everyone's trying to compare things with these things that don't even give you a linear response. So this will jump up 2x when the real measurement is only a couple of milliwatts per centimeter squared. So, that's really revealing to me. That's another layer of the problem, because I got a lot of people that say, oh, Gemba red, is so low, or, all these problems. And it's like, well, look at what you're using to measure first, before you start, telling me I've got something wrong. And so, again, Joovv had third-party measurements, and they tried to set this straight comparing the device A and device B, but they should have just revealed the intensity numbers, and it might have almost been embarrassing a little bit to Joovv, but they could have taken that heat a little bit to reveal a bigger problem in the industry, and they didn't do that. And I've been doing it for a while now. So, but I think if we all get on the same page with measurements, then it's fair to Joovv, it's fair to these guys, it's fair to me. That's the important part. And it's fair to the customer, to the consumer. So you don't buy something that looks like it's twice as powerful when it's really not. It's twice the intensity, or twice, 1,000 watts versus 300 watts, the rated watts. So how can you compare all these things? It's not fair to anyone, especially not the consumer, because you lose out on the benefit of the sale. You lose out on, getting what you paid for. If someone says you've got 2x the intensity, 5x the intensity, it doesn't matter. If you got tricked into buying that and it's wrong, then that hurts you, the consumer, Especially if you're going to use these as a medical device, as something to heal you, to promote health. You're trying to go by the clinical studies, so everyone's trying to calculate dose these days. But if you're using one of these, you're wrong off the bat by 2x, pretty much, or more. So you're going to start off with these, and you can't calculate dose that way. So everyone's trying to calculate dose, you can't do it. Then if you're 6 inches away, a lot of skin reflection. Even Dr. Hamblin was quoted in a recent interview saying standing, inches away from a panel, standing in front of the panel is ridiculous. You want to be as close as possible, get that skin contact to minimize the reflection losses, because a lot of light is reflecting off your skin. So there's a lot of layers of problem, but it starts with getting accurate measurements. Even if you need a budget laser power meter to start, go with that. It's much more accurate. Okay, so the last section of measurements, because I'm going to skip doing the decibels. The decibels are pretty similar. Just the noise from the fan. We're going to do the flicker measurement. And flicker is also a very interesting phenomena and doesn't get as much attention that it deserves in terms of the health of people if you're sensitive to flicker. And two, if you have an oscillation of the intensity, that's what flicker is. It's up, down, kind of a sine wave effect of, your AC current coming from the wall is poorly converted to DC, and so LEDs will give you this flicker. That's modulating your intensity. It's like pulse. When you calculate pulse, you need to know the peak intensity and the average intensity, and you calculate your dose off the average intensity. So if you have flickering lights, and you don't know the average intensity versus the peak intensity, you're still measuring it wrong. So there's two ways you're measuring things wrong. You're going to start with a solar power meter, and then you've got something that flickers. So we're going to check out flicker. Okay, we're going to start with the flicker measurements. We've got our Radix Lupin meter set to the flicker, and right now we're just kind of reading some incidental sunlight from over here. So that's why the flicker percent is very low. Sunlight is continuous. And we got to turn back on every once in a while. So we're about 12 inches away from the light, but really distance away from a light doesn't really matter when you're doing flicker. If you're in a perfectly dark room, the flicker is just a modulation of the intensity. So there's a couple guys who started a rumor that said that flicker changes with distance, and that's not really true because it's just a modulation, and that modulation doesn't change if you're right on top of the panel or out here or wherever, because it's just a modulation. It's a calculation on the peak and the minimum, up and down, up and down. So it's just a percentage. So it really doesn't change unless you've got a little bit of stray light that's interfering with the measurement, and that's probably what these guys saw when they started this rumor, that it was actually the stray light that they were picking up on as they moved further away. But that's how a lot of these rumors get started. People don't know what they're doing. So we're gonna turn on the Joovv here. I got turned off from the back. Oh, what did I do? There we go. Alright, so I turn on the Joovv. Let's turn this back on. So on percent. Yeah. So we got 11.3% flicker, and I like to keep it, especially for the flicker measurement, on a stable surface so it doesn't interfere. But we see the Joovv is pretty stable at 11.2%. And so 11.2%, that's not terrible in terms of, typical LED lights, but it's also not the best. The IEEE has kind of a recommendation that you want to be under 9% to be low risk, and you even want to be, under 5% or even lower to be zero risk. So like 11% is really not ideal, but it's still better than some lights I've seen, and we'll take a look at the SGrow now too. But it's holding there, it's still holding there, right? If I wave my hand, that creates a little bit of flicker, but then it goes back down to 11.2. So it's staying there. It's not perfect, but it's better than what I've seen, and we'll take a look at the SGrow. So we're gonna go back over here. Turn on SGrow. And put this back on. Alright, so now you see 61% flicker. So we just saw 11% flicker, we see 61% flicker on the SGrow unit. So it's much, much higher blows, the safety recommendations out of the water. I would not be using a light that's this high of flicker. And then, like I said, the up and down oscillations, how is that affecting your intensity? How is that affecting your dose? You don't know, because even my test meters, even my laser meter and the solar power meters, they're not compensating for the flicker. So what's the peak? What's the minimum? What's the average? How are you going to calculate, how are you going to recalculate your actual dosage based on 61% flicker? So it's very high. So again, if they've got these gimmicks of using a solar power meter, giving you something with high flicker, and saying things like 1,000 watts, that all feeds into things that are actually lowering kind of your intensity that you're actually getting, So it's kind of really hard to sift through all this stuff. So that's the flicker. So we got 61 over here, and it was 11, 11.3 over on the Joovv. So we just saw the flicker measurements from the Joovv Solo and the VIG1000. The Joovv was up around 11, and the VIG was up in the 60s. So, there's a huge difference in terms of flicker. And again, flicker, for sensitive people, could give you eye strain, headaches, kind of distractiveness. You can't really use this as like, a lot of people use, the red lights as kind of like night lights or mood lights, and I wouldn't really use that for that, because once you move around you get a lot of stroboscopic effects too, and that causes distraction and causes interference with what you're doing. You can't really read under it because your eyes will strain even more if you're reading by a flickering light. And again, this is all fleshed out by the IEEE. You can look up their documents. Tons of studies. They set these regulations and guidelines, and even the EU, the European Union, is going to be adopting much more stricter flicker policies in the future. So this flicker is a really real deal. And a lot of people ask these companies, both companies, again, that goes back to the truth in advertising. What's your flicker? And they won't tell you. They'll say, oh, there's no flicker because it's invisible to your eye. It has to be measured, or you can do it on a slow motion camera. So, and then some companies get really dodgy and they take a quote from Dr. Hamblin out of context that says, something to the akin of, oh, flicker is kind of like pulsing because, you have some up and down modulation. And so, pulsing is a pretty fun idea, so why not have some flicker? And that's kind of the gimmick that a lot of companies say to defend if they have flicker, or if people are asking about flicker, say don't worry about flicker, it's kind of like pulsing. It's not like pulsing, because again, if you take these quotes out of context, even from someone like Dr. Hamblin, usually you're using a laser like directly onto the skin. You're not aiming a pulsed laser into someone's eye usually. And again, you have to think about all those safety aspects. So if you're holding a pulsed light onto someone's skin, or onto a treatment area, and it's pulsing, then sure, it won't be bothering your eye. And they'll be recalculating the average doses and the average intensity, and you're not getting that from either of these companies. So again, a lot of companies are trying to turn this flicker thing into like, oh, it's kind of like pulsing. But if it is like pulsing, then take it seriously and tell us the average intensity. Tell us the top and the bottom. Tell us the flicker modulation. These are important criteria if you're going to try to upsell us on flicker, And so I was wrong in the last section. We're going to do another section on EMFs, right? So we're going to do the milligauss, with our specialized milligauss meter, and we're going to do electric field on our electric field meter. So we're going to test these out, and that's the big thing, is especially with panels like this, all of them pretty much say, oh, you need to be at least 6 inches away. And why is that? That's not based on any science. 6 inches away isn't some magical, clinically relevant thing. And actually, the further away you go, the more skin reflection you get. And that's why even Dr. Hamblin will tell you, you get that skin reflection. So why do companies tell you to be 6 inches away from the panel if most of the light's going to be reflecting off the skin? It's because, to tell you, if you're at least 6 inches away, you have 0 EMF, and that's always been a gimmick, you know, from the start with a lot of these panels. They say, oh, you want 0 EMF panels, you don't want that EMF stress, you don't want potential problems in the future if you're exposed to EMFs, whatever it is. I agree with it. I'm just saying, why do you design a panel that you have to be 6 inches away that takes away a lot of the effectiveness, a lot of the penetration, a lot of the absorbed intensity that you would get? Why would you even design a panel that way? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's the gimmick. Has nothing to do with clinical, you know, relevance. So 6 inches, you know, a lot of people that are new to this industry, they see all these panels and they all say the same thing, 6 inches away, 6 inches away. They think there's something special about it. There's nothing special about it. It's a bad idea. But again, if you can make a big high-powered panel and blast people with a lot of light, you know, you can still get an effect even at 6 inches away. So we're going to check, you know, the EMFs from both of these and see how they turn out. And, you know, that'll be our last step. Okay, so here's both EMF meters. Left is milligauss, right is volts per meter electric field. It's a grounded, system ground test. So ME 3030B from gigahertz, and then this is the Alpha Lab UHS2. So you can see this. There's some ambience, you know, in my current environment, even with the panels are off. There's some ambient milligauss, 0.22. There's a little bit of ambient electrical field, 1.2. So again, we want to discount them when we measure the panel and say, okay, some of this is just the environment. I'm not in a perfect Faraday cage when I'm doing this measurement. So now we'll turn on the Joovv. So we don't see much increase, maybe a little bit if we were at 0.22 and now we've gone up to, you know, 29 or 28. So really, you know, really super low EMF. And let's just double check the measurement. Where are we at? Well, we're 8 inches away. Let's get a little closer. The box is gonna fall. Okay, now we're just about 6 inches away. You know, so 0.5. So we did go up a little bit as we got closer. So we're at 0.5. Still less, you know, obviously less than a milligauss. So that's good. And the electric field is actually a little bit lower. It's not perfectly center. But so we can see it's really low. If, you know, again, if you're 6 inches away or more, is a non-issue. You know, practically nothing. But we know if we move, especially the magnetic field for these types of panels, as we get closer, you're going to expect to see a little bit higher. So we get, you know, closer for, you know, 20, 29, almost 30. So we're, you know, you get up to 29 in some of these areas on the panel, and that's why, you know, a lot of these companies will still advise you, you know, make sure you're at least 6 inches away, because you don't want, you know, especially the 25. So there's different areas, different pockets. Maybe it's where the drivers are or where the fans are. So you got to pay attention to where different components are. So I think there's kind of a high spot up, down, around here. I think it's where the power comes in on the other side. But so you can see that. So yeah, let's move over. Again, we're just going to try to scooch everything over to the SGrow. Turn off my Joovv. Off. Even though the fan from the Joovv is still running. So we've got this. You know, again, everything's off except the Joovv is still, the fans are still running, so that's annoying. Let me turn off the Joovv fully. Much better. Okay, so we're looking at these. Again, there's a little bit of ambient. similar to before, but again, not too bad. Now we'll turn it on. So we do jump up a little bit on the magnetic field, 1.4, about 1.2, it's kind of moving around. So where the Joovv was probably, what, 0.5 maybe? This jumps up to 1.2, so almost double, you know, you could say maybe double the milligauss, the magnetic field. Electric field, yeah, that looks higher too. I think on the Joovv was pretty low too, maybe 10 or 20, and this has jumped up a little bit too. So you get a little bit, maybe because it's got the plastic instead of the metal, and the metal parts can be grounded. You can't ground the plastic. So you get a little bit of a jump. If you're, you know, let's double check, we're about 6 inches away. Yeah, so we're just about 6 inches away, and so we get a little bit higher on this SGrow VIG1000. So you can see, you know, if you really want to avoid it, then, you know, this is definitely higher. It's not terribly higher, so it's not too bad. So, you know, again, I think it's tolerable, but I think, you know, if people really want to avoid this EMF stuff, then the Joovv is much better. And again, we can move, typically the milligauss, we'll see kind of jump up. And this is like the real key factor, why you shouldn't move closer to your panel when you can get 70 milligauss. Super, you know, it's wicked high. 55, 60, super high. So that's why you don't get closer than 6 inches all the way across. So again, if you wanted to move closer to the Joovv, relatively speaking, the Joovv is safer if you want to get a little closer. You know, and think about these, you know, 60, 70, you don't want to get any closer to this. So that's limiting you, you know, in terms of kind of safety, in terms of you could accidentally get a little too close and get too high exposure. But if you're back here, it drops down. So again, you can feel pretty safe at least 6 inches away. You're good to go. Here, again, it's relatively higher. So again, pay attention to these things. You know, pay attention to how your body feels. If you've got higher flicker, higher EMFs, you know, what's your body going to respond to? Are you feeling some sort of, you know, flicker distress or EMF distress? Pay attention to that. It might not be, everyone says, it's a detox reaction when you get a new light, but maybe it's something funky with EMFs or flicker or whatever. Okay, so we'll go back and do our summary. Okay, thanks for hanging in there all the way to the end. We just finished the magnetic and electric field measurements. You know, the Joovv definitely does much better than the SGrow in terms of magnetic field, electric field, even at 6 inches away. You know, the VIG1000 was a little bit higher. So again, if you're really, you know, these are the details that could be a determining factor for people. And if you don't get those accurate measurements, you know, what do you go by? So again, if you have the right stuff, you can measure side by side and say, okay, you know, EMF's important to me, flicker's important to you, intensity's important, watts, you know, whatever it is, wavelengths, you know, again, these are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to verify those. But again, all these companies are coming out with all these fancy spectrums, multiple wavelengths, but if they're not getting it third-party tested, they're not checking the spectrum, what are you actually getting, especially for the invisible bulbs? You know, the invisible near-infrareds, 830, 810, 850, how do you even verify that? With the reds, you can, you know, see a little bit by eye, but, you know, you want to get that data. So that's why, you know, we did this test to begin with. We've got two highly contrasting panels in front of us. And it's a great way to learn a lot about how these panels are being marketed, how they compare, how they perform, and, you know, how we can, like, encourage companies to do better on how they design it. Maybe they want to reduce flicker or magnetic field. Maybe they want to improve their measurement techniques and be more transparent with it. Whatever it is, you know, all these things that I do, it's to help benefit the consumer, to demand better practices from the manufacturers. So that's why I do it. And this is a great example because we've got one of the highest cost panels in the market and one of the lowest cost panels in the market. And so how they compare tells us a lot. And we've learned a lot, especially on the intensity, on the watts, how, you know, the intensity is really kind of mucked up when you're looking at solar power meters versus laser meters that are much more stable. And, you know, factoring in all these things like flicker, you got to be 6 inches away, you don't want to get closer because of EMFs. All these factors are, you know, kind of overlooked because, again, people aren't listing out, you know, if you just had the specification sheets on both of them, they're both accurate, you go boom, 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 and you get to benefit as a consumer. You can compare these two. You should always have the choice to compare, you know, a cheaper option with the higher end option. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go with the Apple brand because you trust it and you want the Apple and you know, you like everything about it, go for it. I always buy, you know, I buy the cheaper brands, I buy the budget brands, and they work fine for me. You know, something like that. That's your choice. Or, you know, anything in between. Sometimes, you know, again, if you have a particular criteria, then you got to look for that. But right now, it's just a mess because you can't compare between brands. It's almost impossible unless you do side-by-side testing like this, and until we demand more accurate, more transparent advertising. So, you know, I hope that helps. You can ask me any questions. We can try to do more measurements in the future, more reviews, different brands, whatever we got to do to start, you know, getting more information, shining a light on all these issues in the industry. All right, well, thanks for staying in there. I know it was long, but I think everyone learned a lot from this, and if I only learned something and nobody watches it, that's okay with me too. I learned a lot. So thanks for staying with me.